The last thing you want out of the king of your polis is to have some insane freak who bludgeons random citizens on the head before killing himself slowly with a knife. But sometimes that's exactly what you get. Now, we've covered crazy King Cleomenes on this channel before, mostly covering his funny little habit of walking around the city with his scepter and clunking random Spartan citizens on the head. Now, we've also covered his incarceration into a pair of stocks in order to prevent further bludgeoning. This goofy little story, however, has taken on an air of tragedy, as we now have word from Sparta that the king has been found dead, killed by his own hand. Finding himself left alone with a single keeper, he asked the man for a knife. The keeper at first refused, whereupon Cleomenes began to threaten him. Until at last he was afraid, being only a helot, and gave him what he required. Cleomenes had no sooner got the steel than, beginning at his legs, he horribly disfigured himself, cutting gashes into his flesh along his legs, thighs, hips, and loins, until at last he reached his belly, which he likewise began to gash, whereupon in little time he died. From king of Sparta to insane, crazy, self-mutilating nuisance, oh how the mighty have fallen. Now we can only guess why the gods chose to drive Cleomenes insane. Or can we? What if I were to tell you that we know the exact reason that Cleomenes was driven mad, and it has something to do with his dark past? Now, I assure you, there's a lot of he said, she said going on here. If you ask an Argive or a boat-humping Athenian, they'll tell you that he was driven mad due to sacrilegious crimes he committed while on campaign against Argos 3 years ago. Now, the rest of the Hellenic world will tell you that it's a pretty open and close case of political scandal turned sacrilege. And, of course, if you ask any of the Spartans, they will, of course, say that it has nothing to do with any of this, that it is just a textbook case of un-Spartan-like debauchery. You can rest assured that we will touch on all these things and more on this episode of Drama Trauma. But first, a word from our sponsor. Now, I know my audience, and I know most of you are no doubt sensitive young men watching this video instead of going to the gymnasium. Now, between you and me, being a sensitive young man can be hard. And holy Hades if Apollo hasn't been the worst this year on sensitive young man's skin, like an overly friendly Erastes nibbling on your neck. Tell Apollo this summer that no means no, with the new straw wide-brimmed pedisauce from the workshop of Linus of Corinth. Shield your head and shoulders from the sun in all your journeys ahead. Getting back into it, though, why was Cleomenes cursed with insanity by the gods? We'll start with the Argive and Athenian theory. Now, 3 years ago, after having received an oracle from Delphi that he would surely conquer Argos if he were to do so, King Cleomenes went on campaign against the Argives. On his way with the Spartan army to Argive territory, he made sacrifices to a river that needed crossing. Sacrificing to said river, though, and seeing that the signs were not good, Cleomenes refused to cross with his army. Now, the Spartans, being even more superstitious than your average Hellen, were not about to incur the wrath of some sort of angry river god. So instead, Cleomenes marched to the ocean, made sacrifices to Poseidon, and seeing that the signs were much better, had his men board boats and sail over to Argive territory instead. After achieving a quite stunning victory over the army of Argos at the Battle of Sepia, Cleomenes then, during the rout, chased and cornered many Argive hoplites in a sacred grove where they took up defensive positions. Now, at first, Cleomenes avoided direct confrontation, instead tricking the Argives into coming out individually by pretending that he had had word from their government about their ransom being paid for their release from the encirclement. Now, at first, this seemed plausible since he called each individually down by their names. However, as it turns out, he was in fact killing each man as he came down and exited the grove, having learned their true names from Argive turncoats. Once the Argives got wise to this deception, however, they refused to leave their fortified position in the sacred grove. At this point, Cleomenes bid his slave helots to create great bushels of brush to light them on fire and throw them around the grove, thus setting it on fire, smoking the rest of the Argives out, and killing them. Now at this point, Cleomenes asked one of the Argives who this grove was sacred to, and after being told that this grove was sacred to the giant Argos, servant of Hera, Cleomenes was very disappointed, for he took it that this was the fulfillment of the oracle that he would conquer Argos. And so he basically just took his army home, not even making an attempt on the city of Argos itself, even though its male population had just been absolutely decimated by him and his army. This behavior was so baffling, in fact, that the Spartan government even launched an inquiry into this abandonment of the campaign, thinking perhaps that Cleomenes had been bribed by the Argives to leave. Cleomenes, however, informed the inquiry that he, while in Argive territory, had stopped by a temple of Hera, beat up its head priest, made a sacrifice, and seen fire sprout out from the breasts of the statue of Hera instead of its head, which means he had to come home. Now that makes sense to me, and it made even more sense to the Spartan government, who quickly brushed everything under the rug. Now, while all of this almost certainly did happen, and probably doesn't help Cleomenes' estimation in the eyes of the gods, most of the Hellenic world agrees that this definitely isn't the primary reason he was driven divinely mad. It was, after all, 3 years ago. Why would the gods choose to wait that long to drive him nutters? Checkmate, Athenians. Fuck you. Now, earlier this year, there was a massive political scandal in Sparta involving their two dynastic kings. The Aegeid king Cleomenes, who we've been covering, and the Eurypontid king, famous Olympic charioteer champion Demaratus. Now, both kings were in a bit of a pickle because they didn't really like each other and were continuously accusing each other of unkingly behavior in the Spartan courts. Now, this all came to a head when Cleomenes accused Demaratus of being the son of his mother's previous husband, and not the previous Eurypontid king in his lineage, therefore making him illegitimate. Now, usually this would just be a crazy claim that really couldn't be backed up with anything substantial. However, the circumstances surrounding Demaratus's birth are somewhat strange. Now, before Demaratus was born, the previous Eurypontid king Ariston was having trouble producing an heir. Now, despite having 2 wives, he really didn't blame this barrenness on himself, and instead went looking for a new, better wife. Specifically, the wife of his best friend, which is not very cash money. However, at a party while drinking with his best friend, he made him swear one of those classic oaths, the, "Oh, I love you so much, and you love me, I'll give you whatever the heck you want. Let's take oaths, that you can ask anything of me, and I can ask anything of you, and we'll trade, because we're best friends." Classic, very classic little wife-stealing trick. And, since Ariston had 2 wives already, the guy couldn't imagine him possibly asking for his wife. So they both swore their oaths, and after taking one of Ariston's treasures from the Spartan palace, Ariston then asked for his wife, which the guy very reluctantly agreed to hand over. Now, you may ask, did she have an opinion on the matter? Was she asked? Well, and the answer to that is, of course not. Now, before she had spent a full 10 months in the household of Ariston, she gave birth to a son. When word of this newborn son was brought to Ariston while he was in council, he did some quick maths on his fingers and figured, since it hadn't been a full 10 months since she had lived in his household, that this son specifically couldn't possibly be his. And he specifically said so to the surrounding men in council. Now, pretty much everyone in the city regarded this as his son. And even Ariston later took back his words in council, saying that it was from thoughtlessness that he had forgot that women can give birth to babies earlier than 10 months, sometimes even to the 7th month. This little baby, of course, being Demaratus, he was thus acknowledged as the heir to the Eurypontid dynasty and the descendant of Hercules. However, in this court case in which Cleomenes pressed the charge of Demaratus being illegitimate, they brought up this utterance of Ariston in council in front of witnesses, which they claimed proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that he was in fact illegitimate, not the son of the true king, and therefore had to be ousted as the king. Now, this court case turned into quite the legal mess. And what do you do when these legal messes rear their ugly heads? Well, you of course send a messenger to the oracle at Delphi, so the gods can have their final say. And the oracle said that Demaratus was in fact not the son of Ariston. Thus, he was removed as king, becoming nothing but a normal Spartan citizen. When the new Eurypontid king, an associate of Cleomenes who plotted with him to get the throne in this way, continuously mocked Demaratus to his face, he, however, decided to flee Sparta, all the way to the king of Persia's court, where he continues to live in exile to this day. But herein lies the sacrilege of this political drama. As it turns out, the oracle at Delphi was not a genuine oracle. Cleomenes had sent ahead to one of his associates, Coban, who was very influential among certain prophetesses amongst the oracle. It has now been discovered that this Coban pressured one of the prophetesses to give the answer that Cleomenes desired. After all of this came to light, and Coban and the prophetess he pressured were exiled from Delphi, Cleomenes himself fled to Arcadia, before being recalled by the Spartan government to continue being the king. It is here, then, that he began slowly being driven mad by the gods for the sacrilege he committed against the oracle. Now, as you can sort of tell by the Spartans bringing Cleomenes back to be king, even after the discovery of this sacrilege, they are sort of trying to brush it under the rug. They instead say that this is nothing more than textbook debauchery, saying that Cleomenes associated himself with a delegation from Scythia. They say he often spent many nights with them, drinking unwatered wine, in a fashion he would then take up after they had left. This wanton alcoholism and this continual drinking of unwatered wine is what they insist drove Cleomenes insane, driving him to bludgeon people on the head and eventually kill himself. Now, this answer isn't very fun, but what else can you expect from those laconic freaks? For better or for worse, both kings of the previous year have been deposed. Cleomenes now in the underworld, and Demaratus in a self-imposed exile in a foreign court. Cleomenes' little brother / son-in-law has now taken up the mantle of the new Aegeid king of Sparta, a one Leonidas. Now, I'm sure after the craziness of the previous Cleomenes regime, Leonidas' reign will be calm, pleasant, and peaceful.